They buried their kings in the dark, down beneath the cold stone of the north, where the old blood sleeps with iron across its knees, to keep the dead from rising. But what if, one night, something rose that no iron could hold? Not a Stark, not a Bolton, not a king this broken land had ever named. What if Sung Jinwoo, the Shadow Monarch, the sovereign of the dead, awakened in the tomb of Winterfell, in a world where an older king of the dead is already marching south to end all life, a realm where the honest die screaming, and the clever wear their crowns in blood, and none of it will matter, because beyond the wall the true dark is waking. Two kings of the dead, one living world caught between them, and only one throne of corpses can stand. They will not know whether to kneel to him, or to burn him, and when this tale is done, you decide who wakes up next. Name the universe, name the character, drop them in the comments, and I will drag them through whatever world will hurt them most. Now come down into the dark with me. The king is waking. The crypts of Winterfell had always been colder than the grave above them, and Wyla had stopped minding that a long time ago. Cold was just the shape the world took now. She moved through the dark on hands and knees that had forgotten how to be anything but cold, her lantern throwing a small circle of yellow light that the black drank up almost before it left the glass. Above her the castle was a ruin. She could smell it even down here, the old burnt smell that never fully left the stones, months after the Ironborn and then the Boltons had done their work. Winterfell had been the heart of the north, and now it was a carcass, and Wyla was one of the small living things that still crawled through it, taking what the great dead no longer needed. She was not supposed to be down here. No one was. The Bolton men who held the ruin now told each other the crypts were haunted, and they were not wrong, only wrong about the kind of haunting. It was not ghosts that made the men keep to the upper halls. It was the weight of the place. Down here lay the kings of winter and the lords of Stark, hundreds of them, seated in stone in their long cold niches, each with a direwolf at his feet and an iron longsword laid across his knees. The old ones said the swords were there to keep the vengeful spirits bound in the dark where they belonged. Wyla did not know if she believed that. She only knew that when she came down to scavenge, for a copper candlestick, for a scrap of forgotten cloth, for anything she could trade to keep herself alive one more turn of the moon, she never once felt alone. She had served this house her whole life. She had swaddled a Stark child or two in her younger years, had washed their small clothes, had watched them grow and go off to war, and to King's Landing, and to whatever cold ground had taken them. All of them gone now. The great gray wolf pulled down. She was too old to run, and had nowhere to run to. So she had crept into the bones of the place she'd been born to serve, and she survived, and she told herself that was not the same thing as giving up. That night she went deeper than she ever had. There was a wrongness to the air, and she followed it the way an old woman follows a draft to find the crack in the wall. Past the last of the named kings, past the niches whose faces had worn to smooth blank stone, the passage narrowed and dropped. Here the carvings were older, cruder, the dire wolves more like true beasts, all teeth and hunger. Here the cold had a different quality, not the honest cold of stone and winter, but something that pressed against the backs of her eyes. She should have turned around, a younger woman would have, but Wyla had buried everyone she loved, and there is a kind of grief that burns fear right out of a person and leaves only a terrible, tired curiosity. The passage ended in a vault she had never known was there. It was round and low and older than anything above it. No king sat here. In the center of the floor stood a single sarcophagus of black stone, unmarked. No name, no wolf, no sword, just black stone, and a lid so heavy that 10 strong men could not have shifted it. And from the seam of that lid, thin as a knife's edge, came light. Not lantern light, not fire. A cold violet glow, the color of a bruise, the color of the sky in the last moment before a storm swallows the sun. It pulsed, slow and steady, like something breathing. Wyla knelt at the vault's edge, and could not make herself go closer, and could not make herself leave. She thought of all the old stories then. Not the pretty ones the Septons told in the south, but the true old tales of the north, the ones passed mouth to mouth by women like her over guttering hearths. The long night, when the sun failed for a generation, and the dead walked in their millions, and the cold came down out of the north to swallow the world. The last hero, who went out into the Deadlands with a broken sword to find some power that could turn the dark back. And the promise, half remembered, half invented, that when the night came again, a champion would wake in the north to meet it. Old women's tales. She had never believed them. She had lived long enough to learn that the world was not saved by heroes. The world was a place where good men had their throats opened at wedding feasts while the fiddlers played, and no champion ever came. The light pulsed brighter, and then the black stone of the lid, that no 10 men could move, cracked. The sound of it went through Willa like a spear, a single long fracture, splitting the ancient stone from end to end, and out of that crack poured the violet light in earnest, filling the vault, throwing her own bent shadow huge and trembling up the curved wall behind her. She should have run. Her legs would not answer. She watched, an old woman on her knees in the dark, as the two halves of the lid slid apart and fell, and the crash of them was like a bell tolling in a drowned world. He sat up. For a long moment he simply sat there, upright in the broken tomb, and Willa's mind refused what her eyes told her. A man. A young man, no older than the Stark boys had been when they marched off to die. Black hair, a face pale as the belly of a fish, pale as something that had never known sun. He wore black cloth and black armor such as she had never seen, edged in that same bruise-colored light, and the light seemed to come from him, from under his skin, pouring out of his eyes. His eyes, when he opened them, they were solid violet, edge to edge, and they found her at once in the dark as though the dark were nothing to him at all. Willa did the only thing left to an old woman who has met a thing out of the deep tales. She whispered a prayer to the old gods, the ones with no names, the ones who watched from the weirwoods, and she waited to die. He did not kill her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a map, reading her, weighing her, and finding her small. Then he looked past her, up and around the ancient vault, at the black stone, and the cold, and the guttering little lantern, that was the only warm thing in all that dark. And Willa, watching his face, understood something that frightened her more than any monster would have. He was not confused. He was not lost or newborn or wild. He knew exactly what he was. It was only the where he was taking the measure of, and he was taking it fast. "This is not my world," he said. His voice was quiet. That was the worst of it. She had braced for a roar, for the shriek of a wight, for something inhuman. And instead he spoke plainly, in the common tongue, in a voice low and even, and almost gentle, the voice of a man who had long ago stopped needing to raise it, because the world had learned to go quiet when he spoke. Willa's own voice came out a cracked whisper. "No, my lord, this is Winterfell, was Winterfell." She swallowed. The north, the crypts of House Stark. Something moved behind his eyes at the word crypts. Not fear. Recognition, almost amusement, the grim private amusement of a man who has been dropped into a joke whose punchline he already knows. Of course, that flicker seemed to say. Of course they would put a monarch of the dead to rest in a house of the dead. He rose. He did it without effort, without the stiffness of a man who has lain long in the cold, unfolding to his full height in one smooth motion. And as he stood, the violet light dimmed down into him, until he was only a pale young man in black, in the ruin of an old woman's lantern light. But the vault did not feel emptier for the light going. It felt fuller, as though when the glow drew back into him, it had left something behind in the air. A pressure, a held breath, the sense of a great cold sea standing just on the other side of a thin door. "What year is it?" he asked. "What is happening in this land? Tell me plainly." And Willa, who had told no one anything in months, who spoke mostly to the dead these days, found the whole broken story pouring out of her in the dark. She told him of the War of the 5 Kings, of the boy on the Iron Throne in the far south, and the golden lioness who whelped him, of the young wolf who had risen in the north with vengeance in his heart and a host at his back. She told him how that young wolf had been betrayed at a wedding feast, cut down with his mother and his men and his poor slaughtered dogs, while the guest right was still warm in their bellies, murdered by men who had smiled and broken bread with him. She told him how the flayed men held Winterfell now, how the pink and red banner flew from the broken towers, how the north was a graveyard ruled by the ones who had dug the graves. She had not meant to weep, but she wept, telling it. She had carried it alone too long. He listened. He did not comfort her. She sensed he was not a man built for comforting, that whatever gentleness lived in that quiet voice was not the soft kind. But he listened to all of it without once looking away, and there was a weight to his attention that was its own strange mercy. When she had spent herself, When the last of it had run out of her and left her shaking on the cold floor, he was silent for a while. "A land," he said at last, "where the honest die at the feast, and the treacherous inherit. Aye, my lord." Wyla wiped her face with a cracked red hand. "That's the whole of it. That's the world now." Something changed in him then. It was not anger, or if it was nothing so hot as anger. It was colder and older, and far more certain than that. She thought of a tide turning, far out where no one could see it yet. The great slow turn of water, that means the drowning is already coming for the shore. "I know that world," he said. "I was born into one very like it." He turned from her then, and looked at the walls of the vault, at the crude old carvings of hungering wolves, and beyond them, she felt, at the whole cold weight of the north above, and the frozen dark beyond it. And there was a moment, brief and terrible for how brief it was, when his gaze fixed on the far north as though he had felt something out there answer the cold in himself, something vast and patient and already moving. He did not name it, but his eyes narrowed a fraction, the way a man's do when he realizes he is not the only one of his kind in the room. "There is another," he said quietly, not a question. Wyla did not understand him then. She would, later. "My lord?" He did not answer. When he spoke again, it was not truly to her. It was to himself, or to something farther off, some vast listening thing that had been waiting in the dark of this world for a very long time. "Show me," he said softly. "You're dead." And the shadows at his feet, the ordinary shadows, the harmless dark that any lantern makes, moved. They did not flicker. They did not dance the way shadows dance with a guttering flame. They gathered. They ran together across the floor like spilled ink, flowing uphill, pooling at his back, rising, thickening, taking on a depth that no shadow should have, a depth you could fall into. Wyla's lantern flame bent toward it as if drawn. The cold in the vault sharpened to a knife. Out of that gathering dark, something began to take shape behind him, tall, taller than a tall man, a suggestion of crimson armor, and a great blade, and 2 points of red light where eyes would be, kneeling, and beside it another shape, and behind that, the sense of more, of many more, an army of held breath waiting just past the thin door of the world. Wyla, kneeling in the ruins of the house she had served her whole life, in the tomb of the kings she had outlived, looked up at the pale young man wreathed now in rising violet dark, and at the vast kneeling thing behind him, and she understood at last which of the old tales had come true. Not the hero. The old women had gotten the story wrong, all those centuries, telling it wrong around their hearths because the truth was too large and too cold to say plainly. Something had woken in the north to meet the coming dark, but God help them all. It was not on their side. Not yet. It was on no one's side but its own. And far away, past the wall, past the haunted forest, in the white silence at the top of the world, a figure crowned in ice turned its ancient head south, as though it, too, had felt the door of the world open, and something stepped through that it did not recognize. 2 kings of the dead now walked beneath the same cold sky. Only one throne of corpses could stand. They came up out of the crypts a little before dawn, the old woman and the king, and Wyla had the strange sensation of leading a lord home to a house that no longer belonged to either of them. He walked a pace behind her through the black passages, silent, and she found she had stopped being afraid of him in the simple animal way, and had begun to be afraid of him in a deeper way, the way one fears weather or the sea. He asked her questions as they climbed, not many, and never twice. How many men held the castle? Where they slept, where they watched, who commanded them, and what manner of man that commander was. She answered as best she could, and she noticed that he never asked her the things a lord usually asked, never how strong the walls were, never how many horses or how much grain. He asked only about the men, as though walls and horses and grain were not, to him, obstacles worth the counting, as though the only thing in any castle that had ever truly stood in his way was the living, and even that not for long. Ramsay, she told him, when he asked after the man who held Winterfell now. Ramsay Snow, they called him, before the crown made him a Bolton True, a bastard given his father's name for services rendered. She spat, dry, into the dark. He flays men, my lord, peels them living, and hangs the skins from the walls. He does it for the pleasure of it, not the need. His father does terrible things because they serve him. Ramsay does them because he likes the sound they make. I have known men like that, Jinwoo said. And what did you do with them? He was quiet a moment, climbing. Nothing worth telling an old woman on the stairs. They came out through a broken door into the godswood, and the sky above the shattered towers was going gray with the first of the light. Wyla stopped there, at the edge of the trees, because she dared go no further. The yard beyond was the Boltons' ground, and an old scavenger caught in the open at dawn was a flayed woman by noon. But he walked on past her, out from under the trees into the open, and she nearly cried out to stop him, and did not, because there was something in the set of his shoulders that told her stopping him was not a thing that had ever worked. The weirwood stood at the heart of the godswood, its bone-white bark, and its carved red face weeping sap that looked black in the half-light. He paused before it. Wyla, watching from the trees, saw him look up into the red leaves for a long moment, and she had the mad thought that he was listening to it, and the madder thought that it was listening back. The old gods watched from the weirwoods. Perhaps, she thought, they had been waiting a long time for someone their equal to stand beneath their branches. Perhaps they were glad, perhaps they were afraid. She could not tell which, and neither, she suspected, could they. Then he crossed the yard toward the great keep, unhurried, a lone figure in black walking openly through a castle full of men who killed strangers for sport, and the killing began. It did not begin the way she expected. The first Bolton man to see him was a guard half asleep at the foot of the keep stairs, a boiled leather brute with a flayed man badge and a spear. He had not troubled to hold upright. He saw the stranger and did what such men do, barked a challenge, lowered the spear, expected the stranger to freeze or flee or beg. Jinwoo did not slow. He did not draw a blade. Wyla never once saw him carry a blade. He simply raised one hand, almost lazily, the gesture of a man brushing aside a branch on a path, and the guard's own shadow, his own shadow, stretched long across the frost by the low gray light, rose up off the ground behind him, and took him by the throat. The man had time to make one sound. Then the shadow pulled him down into itself, into the dark at the foot of the stairs, and he was gone, spear and badge and all, as though the ground had swallowed him. The frost where he had stood was unbroken. It was as if he had never been. Wyla pressed her cracked hand to her mouth and made no sound at all. After that it was quick, and it was quiet, and that was the horror of it. She had seen killing. Everyone in the north had seen killing by now. It was the one harvest that never failed. She knew the shape of it, the shouting, the clash, the screaming, the long, ugly business of men doing murder with their arms. This was none of that. This was a man walking through a castle at dawn, and everywhere he walked the shadows stood up and took the living down into the dark, one and then another and then three at once, and there was no clamor to rouse the rest because the dead made no noise going. A guard on the wall simply was not there anymore. A knot of men at a brazier turned to see their fellows gone and their own shadows rising, and then they were gone too. Winterfell was being unmade of its garrison the way a tide unmakes a sand fort, quietly, from the bottom, until the whole thing simply is not standing any longer. And behind him, as he walked, the dark he had taken them into began to give some of them back. Wyla saw the first of it and did not understand it, and then understood it and wished she had not. The shadow at the foot of the stairs, where the first guard had gone down, it swelled and rose and set the guard back on his feet. But he was not a guard anymore. He was a thing of smoke and violet edges in the shape of a guard, eyeless, silent, his flayed man badge now a smear of dark, and he turned and fell into step behind the king, like a soldier who had served him 100 years. One became two became six. By the time Jinwoo reached the doors of the great hall, the men who had held Winterfell an hour before walked at his back as shadows, and the pink and red banners hung above a garrison that now belonged, every last soul of it, to the sovereign of the dead. He had not raised his voice once. He had not been touched once. He had walked into a murderer's castle and simply added it to himself. Ramsay Bolton met him in the great hall, because Ramsay Bolton, whatever else he was not a coward, and men had come running by then, the few left, the ones who had been abed in the keep and woke to a wrongness they could not name. They came with steel and torches into the hall where the old Stark banners had once hung, and they found the stranger standing calm in the middle of the floor, with a legion of their own dead ranked in silence behind him, and even Ramsay's cruel soft mouth went still for a moment at the sight. "Now this," Ramsay said, recovering, circling, his pale eyes bright and greedy, the way they went bright when something new was brought to him to break. "This is a rare thing. Sorcerer? Warlock? Some associate trick?" He wet his lips. "You've cost me good men. I'll want them back, and I'll want your skin for the taking of them. But first you'll tell me how it's done." "You misunderstand," Jinwoo said. "They are not yours to want back. They were never truly yours in life. They only feared you. Now they serve me, and they fear nothing at all." He tilted his head, studying Ramsay with a flat and clinical interest, the interest of a man examining an insect he has seen many times before and never once found interesting. "You are the one the old woman spoke of, the one who peels men for the sound." Ramsay smiled his soft smile. "You've heard of me. I have known 100 of you." Jinwoo's voice did not rise, did not sharpen. If anything, it gentled, and the gentling was the most frightening thing in the room. In every world there is a Ramsay, a small man who mistakes cruelty for strength, because he has never once met the real thing. You hurt the weak and call it power. You have never in your life stood in front of something that could hurt you, and so you have never learned what you actually are. He let that settle. "I could show you, but you would not survive the lesson, and I find I have no wish to teach it twice." For the first time in a long time, Wyla, who had crept to the hall doors, who could not have stayed away if it cost her the flaying, saw Ramsay Bolton's smile falter. Not from fear of death. Ramsay had made his peace with dealing death, and had never seriously imagined receiving it. What frightened him, she saw, was smaller and worse. He had finally met a man who looked at him and was bored. All Ramsay's terrors, all his careful arts, the whole grim theater of the flaying knife and the kennels and the screaming, and this pale stranger had weighed the sum of it and found it beneath his attention. It unmade something in Ramsay to be seen so clearly and dismissed so completely. So Ramsay did what small men do when they are frightened. He gave the order to kill. His men were brave, or desperate, which in the north had long since become the same thing. They came at Jinwoo with steel and fire, a dozen at once, and the shadow soldiers behind him did not so much as stir, because they did not need to. The monarch let the men come. He stood in the center of the hall, and let the first of them reach him with a swung sword, and the sword struck his shoulder and rang off the dark armor beneath the coat, with a sound like a hammer on an anvil, and did nothing. Not a scratch, not a stagger, nothing. The man had time to feel the wrongness of it, the sheer immovable fact of it, before his own shadow took him. It was over in the space of a few breaths. Jinwoo walked through them, the way a man walks through tall grass, and where he passed, the grass did not spring back up. When it was done, the hall was silent again, and the ranks of shadow at his back were a dozen deeper, and Ramsay Bolton stood alone before the high seat of a house he had helped murder, a lord of nothing, a bastard with a stolen name, and no men left living to hear him give an order. "You," Ramsay breathed. "What are you?" "I have been called many things." Jinwoo crossed the hall toward him, slow, unhurried, and the frost of his passing seemed to dim the very torches. The last of them was Monarch. He stopped before the terrified man. "But you may call me what your old women in the crypts called the thing they waited for. The one who wakes in the north when the long dark comes." A pause. "I am not the hero of that tale. I want you to understand that clearly, in the little time you have left to understand anything. I did not come to save your world. I came into it. There is a difference, and every soul in these 7 kingdoms is about to learn it." Wyla did not see Ramsay Bolton die, because she looked away, but she heard it, and she would tell you, if you asked her, that the man who peeled others for the sound they made went into the dark making a sound of his own, and that it was not a large sound, and that no one wept to hear it. When she looked back, the flayed man banners were coming down, not torn by hands, falling, rotting, the pink and red cloth going black and crumbling to ash, as the shadow cold rolled through the hall, as though the castle itself were shedding a sickness it had carried too long. And in the high seat of Winterfell, the seat of the kings of winter, the seat of the wolves, a pale young man in black now sat with his chin on his fist, gazing at nothing, or at everything, with the weary patience of something very old, wearing the face of something very young. He did not want the chair. Wyla understood that, watching him. He had not fought for it, and did not prize it. He sat in it, the way a traveler sits on a stump at a crossroads, because it was there, and he had, for the moment, stopped walking. But an army stood at his back now that had not existed at dusk, and it would grow, she knew. It would grow with every dead thing this dying land could feed it, and this land could feed it forever. "Old woman," he said, without looking at her. She crept into the hall, into the presence of her new and terrible lord, and knelt, because her knees gave out, rather than from any wish to. "My lord, you served the wolves. All my life, my lord, till the wolves were gone. They are not all gone." He said it quietly, and something in the way he said it made her look up sharply. "There is a girl in the wild, a boy beyond the wall, who is more than a boy now, and less. The line is not ended, only scattered." His violet eyes found her, and there was in them, for just a moment, something she had not expected to see there. Not warmth exactly, but its cold cousin, a kind of iron regard for the loyalty of the small. "You kept faith with a dead house through a dark that killed everyone braver than you. That is not nothing. In my experience, it is very nearly everything." Wyla wept again, and could not have said why, except that no one had called her faith anything but foolishness in a very long time. "There is a war coming," Jinwoo said, rising from the wolf's seat, and the whole army of Shadow rose with the motion of him like a tide answering the moon. "Not the war your lords are fighting in the south. That war is already over. They simply have not been told. For the real war comes down out of the ice, and it is older than your houses and your thrones and your pretty game of chairs. And it does not want the north or the throne or the crown." He looked to the north, through the walls, through the world, at the thing she had felt him feel in the crypts. "It wants what I want, the dead, all of them, every soul in this world, standing behind one king or the other when the snow settles." He walked toward the broken doors, toward the gray dawn and the cold road north, and the dead of Winterfell walked with him. "There cannot be two of us," he said, almost to himself. "There has never been room in any world for two kings of the dead. He knows it. I knew it the moment I woke and felt him turn his head." A pause at the threshold, the pale light on his pale face. "One of us keeps the corpses of this world. The other is simply the largest corpse of all." He stepped out into the dawn, and far to the north, past the wall, past the haunted forest, on a plain of blue-white snow where nothing living had walked in 1,000 years, the ranks of the dead stood suddenly still. 10,000, 100,000, a horizon of the risen frozen mid-March, as their silent crowned king lifted his ancient face to the southern wind, and, for the first time in all the long centuries of his patience, felt something in the world that was not prey. Two kings, one sky, a whole living world of corpses between them, waiting to see whose command they would answer when the end came. The march had begun on both sides at once. The north they crossed was a country of the dead already, and it made the monarch stronger with every mile. Wyla rode with him. She had not meant to. An old woman had no business on the war road, and she had told him so, and he had looked at her with that flat violet patience, and said only that the road south was no safer now than the road north, and that a thing that had kept faith through one long dark might as well see the end of it. So she rode a shadow horse that made no sound and left no track, and was cold as a mill pond in winter beneath her, and she wrapped herself in a dead lord's furs, and she followed the sovereign of the dead up the spine of the world. He did not raise the fallen as they went. That surprised her. There were bodies enough. The north was a boneyard. The war and the winter between them had seen to that. And in every burned village and frozen ditch lay men and women and children the ground had not troubled to take. She had thought he would gather them all, swell his host to a flood. He did not. He passed most of them by. When she found the nerve to ask him why, riding at his flank through a gray afternoon, he was quiet a while before he answered. "An army is not numbers," he said. "Any fool with power can raise a mob of corpses." And he did not need to say who he was. There was only one he left in the world that mattered to the monarch now. Raises everything. Every beast, every child, every drowned and frozen and rotted thing. His host is a flood, and a flood has no will but falling. Mine is chosen. He nodded toward Egress, riding ahead of them, the great crimson-armored knight, a silent tower against the gray. I take the ones worth taking. The strong, the loyal, the ones who were something in life. 100 soldiers who were kings and knights and champions will break 100,000 who were only frightened villagers. That is the difference between us. He wants the world to stop. I want it to kneel. A man who wants everything dead is easy to understand. He is only hunger. I am something else. And what are you, my lord? She asked, greatly daring. He was silent for a long time, long enough that she thought he would not answer. When he did, it was in a lower voice, and she understood she was hearing a thing he did not often say aloud, perhaps had never said. A man who was hunted, he said, once, in another world, when I was weak, and everything strong wanted me dead. I was the least of all of them, and I clawed my way up over their bodies until there was nothing left above me. I did not become a king because I wanted a crown. I became a king because it was that or die on my knees, and I had done enough dying on my knees to last me. He looked at the northern horizon, where the sky had begun to take on the wrong gray, the flat dead gray that was not cloud. So I do not do what he does. I do not kill the weak because they are weak. I remember being weak. He has forgotten, if he was ever anything but what he is. That is his flaw, old woman, and in the end, it will be the thing I open him on. He cannot imagine mercy, and so he cannot imagine an enemy who chooses it. He will not see me coming the way I come. They reached the wall 4 days later, and the wall was failing. Willa had never seen it. Few northerners of her station ever had. It stood at the very top of the world, a cliff of ancient ice, 700 feet high and 300 miles long, raised in the dawn of the world, to hold back exactly the dark that was now coming. She had imagined it white and gleaming and eternal. What she found was a wounded thing. Great cracks ran through it, blue-black and deep, weeping meltwater that should not have run in that cold. The castles along its length stood mostly empty, their garrisons long dead or fled south into the war. A handful of black-cloaked crows still holding at Castle Black, with the doomed stubbornness of men who have nowhere left to run to. And beyond it, she could feel it before she could see it, the way she had felt the wrongness in the crypts. Beyond it, the true cold waited, and the true dark, and him. The crows would not open the gate. Jinwoo did not ask them to. He rode to the foot of the wall alone, leaving his host arrayed on the frozen field behind him, and Willa watched from among the silent shadow ranks, as the sovereign of one kind of dead stood at the great barrier, and looked up at the country of the other kind of dead beyond it. And she saw him close his eyes, and she felt, everyone on that field felt, the living crows on the wall, and the shadows below, and the old woman among them, a vast cold attention swing down from the north, and settle on the lone figure at the ice, the way a hawk's shadow settles on a mouse in a field. The Night King had come to the wall to meet him. He did not come alone, and he did not come small. Willa climbed, against all sense, to a broken parapet, where a white-faced crow made room for her without a word. Both of them passed caring about rank or reason at the end of the world, and from there, she saw the far side of the wall, and she never after found the words for it that did it justice. The dead covered the earth, not a host, a geography. From the foot of the wall to the gray horizon, the risen stood in their untold millions, blue-eyed, silent, patient, a sea of them, men and giants and things that had been beasts, and things that had been children, and the snow whites and the ice spiders, and the great dead bears, and rank on rank of them fading north into a blue-white nothing that had no visible end. And before them all, walked out alone to the ice as Jinwoo had walked out alone, came the crowned figure. He was smaller than she had feared, and more terrible than she could have dreamed. Tall, gaunt, a thing of blue-white flesh drawn tight to the bone, crowned in horns of jagged ice grown out of his own skull, and his eyes were the eyes of the dead things, but deeper, colder, a blue with no bottom to it, a blue like the heart of the cracks in the wall. He moved with an absolute, unhurried certainty that Willa recognized with a lurch of horror, because she had ridden 4 days beside its twin. He moved the way Jinwoo moved, two beings who had never in 1,000 years needed to hurry, because the world had always, in the end, come to them. They stood on either side of the wall, the young Dark King and the old Ice King, 700 feet of ancient ice between them, and they regarded one another. Nothing was said. Nothing could be said. The Night King had not spoken in 8,000 years, and the monarch had no tongue in common with him, but the one they both ruled. But Willa, watching, understood that a great deal passed between them in that silence. She understood it the way you understand thunder, not in words, in the bones. Two sovereigns of the dead, taking each other's measure across the barrier, each finding in the other the one thing neither had ever expected to meet, an equal, a rival claim to the only throne either of them had ever wanted. And then the Night King raised his arm. He did it slowly, the way he did everything, and Wyla had seen enough by now to know what it meant, and she cried out a warning that no one needed, and no one heeded. All across the vast frozen field beyond the wall, the risen dead answered the gesture. The whole horizon of them lifted their heads at once, 100,000 blue lights kindling brighter in the gray, and as one, without a sound, the sea of the dead began to move. Not at the wall, not yet, but pressing toward it, testing it, the pressure of an ocean against a failing dam. Where the great cracks wept, the ice groaned. A wound the size of a keep calved off the wall's face and fell, and the ground shook when it landed, and through the new gap, the cold poured south like water finding a break. It was a demonstration. Wyla understood that too. The Night King was not attacking. He was showing the newcomer the size of what he faced, the way one king shows another his host on the field before the parley, so that the terms are understood. This is what I am. This is what I command. This is the flood that is coming for your world, whether you stand in it or not. Kneel, or be the first thing it drowns. And Jinwoo, alone at the foot of the wall, tilted his head back and looked up at the horns of ice and the sky gone wrong behind them. And Wyla, who could not possibly have heard him at that distance, over the groan of the ice and the wind off the top of the world, heard him all the same, because he did not say it with his voice. He said it with the cold, the way the other king said everything. I have seen larger armies than yours. I have destroyed some of them. Numbers are what the weak count when they have nothing else. You have made a sea of the frightened dead, and you think it is strength. I will show you what 100 of the willing dead can do to your sea. And he raised his own hand. The shadows on the near side of the wall rose. Not many. That was the terror and the glory of it, the answer to the flood. The whole argument made flesh. Where the Night King had lifted a horizon, Jinwoo lifted a company. 100 perhaps, no more. But every one of them came up wrong and vast and chosen. The shadow of Egress towering with his great blade, the shadow of Beru unfolding its awful graceful limbs, the taken knights and champions and the flayed lords of the north, and a dark that gathered behind them, deeper than the dark beyond the wall, a dark that had a will in it, a single will, one crown and not a mindless flood, and the blue-eyed dead beyond the ice, for the first time in 8,000 years of their patient march, hesitated. Wyla saw it. The white-faced crow beside her saw it, and made a sound that was half a sob. The endless sea of the dead, which had never in living memory paused for anything, drew back a half-step from the wall, the way a tide draws back from a stone it has not learned yet whether it can move. The Night King lowered his arm, and though his ruined face had no expression that a living thing could read, Wyla felt the temper of the field change, felt something that in a living king she would have called interest, and in this dead one could only call appetite. He had come expecting to frighten a trespasser off his prize. He had found, instead, the only worthy enemy he had faced since the age of heroes, and she understood, with a cold that went past the cold of the field, that the Ice King was not dismayed by this. He was pleased. The parley, if that was what it had been, was over. The two kings turned from the wall, each to his own host, and the field emptied of that unbearable attention, and Wyla found she had been weeping again, the tears freezing on her old cheeks before they fell. Jinwoo rode back to her through the ranks of his own dead, and his face when he reached her was the face of a man who has looked into a mirror and not liked the shape of what looked back. He is what I would have become, he said quietly, and only to her, if I had ever forgotten why I climbed. If I had ruled long enough and cold enough that the reason wore away and only the ruling was left. He looked north, one last time, at the sky gone wrong. 8,000 years. That is how long he has been the only one of his kind. Long enough to forget he was ever anything else. Long enough to believe the throne of the dead is his by right, and the world only a corpse that has not finished dying. A muscle moved in his jaw, the first crack she had ever seen in that terrible calm. He is not wrong about the world. He is wrong about the throne. Can he be beaten, my lord? Wyla asked. It was the only question left. A sea like that. All the dead of the world. A sea can be beaten, Jinwoo said. You do not fight the water. You find the thing that holds the water, and you break that." He turned his shadow horse south, toward the failing wall and the doomed castles, and the great sundered land beyond, where the living still squabbled over their chairs, unaware the tide was already at the top of the world. Every dead thing on that field stands because he stands. His will is the string that moves them all. Cut the string, and the sea is only 10 million corpses again, falling down where they belong. He was silent a moment. "But I will not reach him through the sea. No one could. Not even me." "Then how?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she had cracked open his tomb, Sung Jin-woo smiled. It was not a warm thing. It was the smile of the hunted man he had told her he once was. The smile of the one who was always smallest, who learned to win, not by being the strongest in the room, but by being the only one who understood the room at all. "The living," he said. "This world is full of the living, and they hate each other, and they have spent so long killing each other over chairs that they have not looked up to see the ceiling coming down. He does not think of them at all. Neither would the old king I might have become. That is our blindness, his and the man I never let myself be. The dead forget the living are worth anything." The smile again, cold and certain. "I have not forgotten. I remember being one of them. So I will do the thing the sea cannot do and the Ice King cannot imagine. I will make them stand together. Wolves and lions and dragons and crows. I will put them at my back, and I will use them as the blade, and I will walk that blade all the way to the one string that holds his whole dead world up." He rode south, and his chosen dead rode with him, and the old woman followed her terrible lord down off the roof of the world, toward the doomed and squabbling living, toward the last mad hope of an alliance no one had ever managed to forge, the hope that a monarch of the dead, of all the beings in that cruel world, might be the one to finally make the living remember they were on the same side. Behind them, the wall wept and groaned and began, quietly at its ancient foundations, to die. And beyond it, the crowned king of the ice watched them go, and did not pursue, and began, with the terrible patience of a thing that has waited 8,000 years, and can wait a season more, to gather himself for the march that would decide whose dead inherited the earth. They did not want to kneel to him, and that was as it should be. Jin-woo had never in two worlds trusted anything that knelt too easily. The tale of how he brought them together, the wolves and the lions and the dragons and the crows, the whole shattered, feuding wreck of the living world, is a longer one than there is night left to tell it in, and much of it Wyla did not witness, for she was an old woman, and there was only one of her, and the war had grown very large. But she witnessed the shape of it, and the shape of it was this. He did not conquer them. He could have. 100 of his chosen dead had made the Night King's sea draw back a step. There was no living army in the 7 kingdoms that could have stood against him for the length of a prayer. He could have walked south and taken every chair and every crown and every kneeling lord, the way he had taken Winterfell, quietly, from the bottom, until the whole map was his. He did not, and Wyla came to understand that this restraint was not mercy in the soft sense. It was the coldest and most exact strategy she had ever seen. A conquered host fights the way a slave works, sullenly, badly, watching for the chance to run. He did not want slaves. Against the flood that was coming, slaves would break and drown. He needed the living to fight the way the living only fight when they are fighting for something of their own. Their homes, their dead, their spite, their children, their gods. So he gave them the one thing that would forge them into a blade worth wielding, a common terror larger than their hatred of each other. He showed them the North. He brought them, the great ones and their captains, under flags of a truce he enforced with the simple fact of his presence, up to the failing wall, and he made them look at it. The Dragon Queen came on her greatest dragon, and looked at the horizon of the risen dead, and went white beneath her silver hair, because she had thought her 3 dragons the last word in the language of power, and here was a sentence they could not finish. The Lion Queen in the south, who trusted nothing and no one, sent men who came back raving and were believed at last. The crows, who had screamed the warning for a generation into deaf southern ears, wept to be finally, terribly heard. One by one, in the face of the sea beyond the wall, the living stopped their game of chairs. Not because they had learned to love one another, they never did that, but because even the stupidest and cruelest of them could finally see the ceiling coming down, and it was the monarch who stood at the center of it. The thing that should have been most horrifying to them, a foreign sovereign of the dead, A man who wore an army of their own risen kin at his back became instead, by a logic only the end of the world could have made true, the one power all of them could stand behind. For he was the proof and the answer both. He was living proof that the dead could be commanded, that the flood was not invincible, that there was a way to fight it and win. Where he stood, the impossible alliance held, because his mere existence was the argument that made it worth trying. "They follow you now," Wyla said to him, the night before the end, in a war camp that held every banner of Westeros, pitched side by side, for the first and last time in the history of the world, the whole living world at your back. You could keep them. After, you could take it all. "I have taken it all before," he said. He was watching the fires, the numberless fires of the living host, wolf and lion and dragon and rose and kraken and stag, all of them burning together against the dark. In my own world, there was a moment when everything strong was dead or bowed, and I stood at the top of it alone. And do you know what I found there, old woman? He glanced at her. Nothing. The top of everything is the emptiest place there is. I did not climb for the crown. I climbed to stop being hunted. Once nothing hunts you, the crown is only a heavy hat. He looked back at the fires, at the living. Let them keep their chairs. I did not come into this world to rule it. I came into it, and this is the thing that came with me. And now I will do the one thing the Ice King cannot. I will spend my crown to buy their lives, instead of hoarding it until the reason wears away. A pause. That is the whole of the difference between us. He hoards, I spend. In the end, everything hoarded rots. Only what is spent well was ever worth having. The Night King came the next dawn, and the wall came down to meet him. Wyla was there. She had earned it, she supposed, by cracking open a tomb. The old gods had a cruel sense of who ought to see things through. She stood on a hill behind the living host and watched the great ice barrier that had held the world's dark back for 8,000 years finally fail. Not crack, not calve, but fall. 300 miles of ancient ice coming down in a roar that flattened the world's sound to nothing, throwing up a wall of white that blotted the north from horizon to horizon. And through the falling ice came the sea, the dead of the world, unbarred at last, pouring south in their untold millions. And at the black heart of them the crowned king, walking, unhurried, certain, come to collect the corpse of the world he believed already his. What followed? The singers would spend 1,000 years failing to sing. The living host broke against the flood and did not shatter, because the monarch had built it not to shatter. The dragons burned great roads of fire through the dead, and where the fire fell, the risen fell with it, thousands at a stroke. The one weapon the Ice King's flood truly feared. The chosen dead of the monarch, his 100, his knights and champions and taken kings. Ygritte a red tower of ruin. Beru a laughing horror that no wight could touch. Anchored the line where living men would have broken, and did not tire, and did not fear, and did not fall. And the living, wolf beside lion beside crow, held the ground between, dying in their thousands, and buying with every death the one thing the monarch needed: time, and a path, and the flood's whole attention fixed forward on the killing, so that it never once looked to its own black heart. Because while the two seas of the dead drowned each other on the field, the monarch went for the string. Wyla did not see the duel. No living thing saw all of it, and kept its wits. It happened at the center of the storm, in the cold so deep it stopped the heart, between two beings that the world had no business containing at once. But she saw the edges of it. She saw the sky above the field's heart go black, and then violet, and then a white beyond white. She felt the cold reach out from that place in pulses, each one dropping men dead where they stood, living and shadow alike. A cold that was the two kings testing the full weight of one another with the world for an anvil. She saw, once, through a gap torn in the falling snow, two figures very far away and very small at the center of everything, one crowned in ice and one wreathed in violet dark, meet and part and meet again, faster than sight, and the ground between them for a mile in every direction simply cease, ground and dead and living and all, unmade in the meeting of two powers that should never have shared a world. And she understood, watching, the thing the monarch had told her on the road, the thing he had staked the world upon. You do not fight the water, you break the thing that holds it. All around the duel, the flood of the dead fought on, but the living had made the Ice King look forward, made him spend his will on the great grinding slaughter of the field, so that when the monarch reached him at last, The oldest king of the dead was doing the one thing 8,000 years had never taught him to guard against. He was distracted. He had never had to not be. There had never been a second power in any world to make him choose where to look. He had ruled his flood so long and so absolutely that his will was one seamless thing, poured out equally over 10 million dead, and it had never once occurred to him, could not occur to him, for he had forgotten mercy and so could not imagine an enemy who understood cost, that a foe might make him spend that will in one place so as to steal it from another. The living were beneath his notice. That had always been true, and it had always been safe to be true. And on the last morning of the long night, it was the thing that killed him. For while he poured his ancient will forward into the pleasure of the slaughter, the monarch, who had been the smallest thing in his own world once, who had learned to win not by strength but by understanding the room, walked the blade of the living straight through the one gap the Ice King's attention had left, and reached the string, and took him by the throat. Wyla felt it end the way she had felt it all end, in the bones, before the eyes could catch up. She felt the cold stop, not fade, stop, all at once, a pressure that had been on the whole world since the wall fell suddenly and simply gone. The way a sound you have heard so long you forgot it was there, is gone when at last it ceases, leaving a silence that rings. Across the whole vast field, from horizon to horizon, the risen dead fell down, all of them, in the same instant. 10 million corpses that had been held upright by a single ancient will dropping all at once to the earth the moment that will was broken, a sound like the whole world exhaling, like a held breath 1,000 years long finally let go. The flood did not retreat. It simply, everywhere, at once, fell, and was only the dead again, and lay still. And at the center of the silence, one figure stood, wreathed in guttering violet, alone. They found him there when the snow settled, the living, what was left of them, staggering forward over a field carpeted in the fallen dead of 2 armies, hardly daring the hope of it. The monarch stood at the dead heart of the world, with the shattered crown of ice at his feet, and he did not look like a king who had won. He looked, Wyla thought, pushing through the stunned and weeping host to reach him, because someone had to, and it might as well be the old woman who had let him out, like a man who had met the only other one of his kind, and been forced to end him, and understood, better than any living soul on that field ever could, exactly what he had ended. "It is done," he said, when she reached him. His voice was very quiet, even for him. "The string is cut. The sea is only water again." He looked down at the broken ice crown. He waited 8,000 years to meet an equal, and the meeting killed him. A pause, and something almost like grief moved through the cold of him. Grief for a thing he had hated, which is the loneliest grief there is. "I told you he was what I might have become. I did not tell you the rest. There is no one else, in any world, who understood him. Only me. I am the only mourner he will ever have, and I killed him." He was silent. "That is the price of being the last of your kind, old woman. The only one who can end you is the only one who could ever have known you." The living wanted to make him king, of course. Wyla watched them try, in the days that came after, the Dragon Queen and the lords and the desperate, grateful crowd of the survived, offering him the throne he had bought them, the whole world laid at the feet of the power that had saved it. It was the only way they knew to say thank you, to give a thing the crown. He would not take it. "I told you," he said to Wyla, on the last morning, when the Shadow Army had already begun to fade, for the string that held them was the same kind of string he had cut, and he was letting it go, one chosen dead at a time, releasing his knights and champions, and taking kings back into the true death, now that the war that needed them was won. "The top of everything is the emptiest place there is. I have stood there. I will not stand there again, in a world that is not even mine." He looked out over the north, the broken, freed, surviving north, where the snow was already, impossibly, beginning to melt. Let them keep their chairs. Let them fight over them even. A world squabbling over chairs is a world where the ceiling is not coming down. That is what winning looks like, for the living. The return of small and stupid problems. Let them have it. They paid enough for it. "And you, my lord?" Wyla asked. The last of the shadow soldiers was fading behind him now. Igris, the great red knight, knelt one final time to his king and came apart into violet light and was gone, and the monarch watched him go with the closest thing to gentleness she had ever seen in that cold face. Where does a king of the dead go when the dead are all laid down? Home, if there is a road, he said. There is always a road, for a thing like me. I only have to find where the dark is thinnest. He looked at her then, the old woman who had cracked his tomb, the last keeper of a dead house's faith, the one living soul in all that world who had ridden the whole length of the long night at the side of its most terrible power, and never once knelt from fear, only from failing knees. You did a great thing, old woman, and no one will ever sing of it, because the singers will sing of dragons and kings, and forget the one who opened the door. So I will tell you, since I am the only one who knows, every soul that lives in this world lives because you were too stubborn and too grieved to be afraid of a light in a tomb. Kingdoms have been saved by less. Most have been saved by less. And then the last of the violet dark gathered around him, the way it had first gathered at his feet in the crypt on the night she woke him, and it rose, and it took him, and where the sovereign of the dead had stood there was only the cold, clean morning, and the melting snow, and an old woman alone on a field where the world had ended and had, against all the odds and all the old cruel tales, begun again. Wyla lived a long time after that, longer than an old woman had any right to, as though the long night, having taken so much, had decided to give her back the years it stole. She never told the true tale, because no one would have believed the shape of it, that the thing that saved the world had come up out of a stark tomb, and had not been a hero, and had not wanted them saved so much as unafraid, and had gone away again without a crown or a song or a single soul to thank him, but a scavenger too old to run. But she kept his faith, the way she had kept the wolves, through all the years she had left, and on the coldest nights, at the end of her life, she would go down into the crypts of a Winterfell rebuilt and living once more, down past the kings and the wolves and the iron swords, to a low round vault with a broken black sarcophagus that no one else remembered, and she would leave a light burning there. For the door, she said, when they asked her why, in case a thing like that ever needed to find its way back, in case the dark, somewhere, ever needed a king who remembered what it was to be small.